and good to see you. And for those of you who are on Zoom, thank you for coming here as well, and welcome. I'd like to call I think this is probably the most exciting committee we've had lately, the Reapportionment Task Force Committee together. It's Thursday, June 10th, 2021. Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Ford.
Here.
Gums.
Here.
Kenyon. Martin.
Martin present.
Sanchez. Shepro.
Shepro present.
Strathman.
Strathman here.
Gately.
Here.
Meyer. Arnold. Shelkey. Afif.
Here.
Hernandez. Peterson. Rivera. Walter. Thank you.
All right, we have a forum or a quorum. We do have a quorum, correct? Okay, very good. May I have a motion to approve the May 20th, 21 minutes, but there is a revised copy. So would you like me to go over what the revisions are before we go through the approval?
Oh, yes, thank you.
Yes.
The main revision was the omission of a sentence. The sentence was on the third page, and it's no longer there. So it made reference to the date of August 6th, which was, it was an error, it was insubstantial. And then there was a few capital issues, but that was all.
I'll move to approve.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Raz, second.
Thank you, Mr. Frost.
6 turns out to be the date that President Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act.
Well, I think we ought to keep it back in then. We are all very much in support of that act, obviously. Roll call. If we have a motion to approve and a second, are there any other additional edits or comments? Hearing none, I believe that the minutes are approved, or should we call roll?
Call, please.
Call roll,
It's
please.
unanimous consent that the minutes be approved as revised.
Thank you. Do we have a unanimous consent? Hearing any nays? Hearing no nays, minutes are approved. Oh, I believe we have a member from the public who would like to speak. Antonio Ramirez, are you here?
Yeah, I'm here. Hello.
Hello, Mr. Ramirez. Welcome.
Thank you. Just to clarify, do I have 3 minutes or 5 minutes?
3 minutes.
3 minutes. Okay. Well, thank you so much for hearing my comments. My name's Antonio Ramirez. I'm a professor of history and political science at Elgin Community College. And I'm just here to speak in favor of the plan to create additional majority Hispanic county board districts. For the last several years, I've been documenting the history of Latinos in the Chicago suburbs, and I'm actually completing a PhD dissertation through the University of Michigan on the topic. And I really want to emphasize today how important Kane's Latino population is, not only locally, but regionally and nationally. Since the early 2000s, the majority of Chicagoland's Latinos live, in fact, in the suburbs, not in the city of Chicago, and especially in places like Kane. And between 1980 and the present, some of the fastest growing areas in the Chicagoland area have been found in Latino communities like Elgin and Aurora. Between 1980 and 2019, the population of Kane County grew 90%, but Kane's Latino population grew 500%. The number of Latino residents in Aurora tripled. Elgin's Latino population increased nearly 700%. Today, 1 in 3 Kane County residents is Latino, and that's the high. You probably know that's the highest density of any county in the state of Illinois, including Cook County. And just a couple historical pieces, since I'm a history educator, that I want to share. Some of you may know or may remember, in fact, that amidst this historic growth in the early 1990s, a Hispanic advocacy group had to file a federal lawsuit against the Kane County Board to force it to draw a map that adequately represented Hispanics. And now here we are 40 years later, having a very similar conversation. The pandemic, I think, has really clearly shown that Kane County's Latino population has unique needs and is really deserving of representation on this board. So I want to end by sharing a piece of historical information that I'm almost certain no one here knows, because I just recently discovered it in my research and I'm sharing it publicly here for the first time. I believe it illustrates not only the importance of Kane County's Hispanic community, but also the possibilities for change that this board has in front of it right now. Some often ask me, as a historian in Illinois, who is the first prominent Latino elected official in the state? And while many would think that the first prominent Latino elected official in the state would come from Chicago, the first prominent Latino elected official actually came from Kane County. It was a woman named Maria Margarita Rodriguez Decker that was elected in 1972. She actually won the office after the reapportionment of the county board districts in the early 1970s. So history was made. The first prominent Latino elected official was elected in Kane in 1972. And I just want to encourage this board to let's make history again. Let's take heed of this story and implement redistricting in a way that's fair to the Kane's Latino population. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very interesting comments. I believe there are no other speakers who have registered to present to this task force today. So seeing none online and none here, do we have a motion to move that to the public record?
Jones will move.
Thank you. Second. And may I have a consensus? Yes?
Yes.
Yes. I believe we're all in full consensus. Thank you. So it's time for my comments now. We have now going to be taking a look at 3 maps that were requested. Mr. Shepro did make that request at a meeting, and the 3 different versions of the map are being presented to you today. It is with hope that we will give you the opportunity to take a look at each one of the 3, and then when we meet next time, you will decide. I don't want to rush this process, but if you feel adequate and you can make choices today, that'll be fine as well. But that we would definitely bring it down to 2 and then go through the same process one more time to bring it down to the single map that you would like to move forward with. So that would give everybody adequate time to present. Just to give you enlightenment, what the next step would be after that, we will then be asking our demographer for all of our 24 board members to give them their map with street level view, of course, both electronic and a printout. And you would have the opportunity to take a look at that map and make any requests, adjustments as you feel appropriate. That information then would be returned back to the demographer to see if those adjustments can be made, obviously based on Voting Rights Act requirements, et cetera, population needs, making sure that the district is continuous as humanly possible, and then brought back to you as a task force for your review again, to give it your approval, hopefully. So then we can table that until the board meets to be able to give it their provisional approval by consensus. They will then at that point dismiss you with much gratitude temporarily until we get the actual census data, which is supposed to be coming to us on August 16th. And it is anticipated that our demographer will be able to pull that data to be able to use it appropriately and then bring it back to you with the census data. So we've got the provisional map now with the actual census data for your review and approval, and then recommendation, so that I can bring your recommendation to the full board for their approval by vote. In between that time, of course, we have to allow it for public comment to make sure that our communities and our constituents have an ample time to review the map, to make any comments that they may have that would be relevant and adaptable, so that we can take a look at those and see if we have to make any adaptation one more time and give it back to the board so that they can approve it. So this is going to be our timeline as we move forward. I think it's adequate. Thank you to all of you again for your consideration, but now the work truly has begun. And please, I look forward to receiving your guidance as we go through all of this. We had the last of the town halls yesterday, and we're going to be presenting information about what we've learned from the town halls. And it was a very enriching experience for us all, both on the formal conversation that was presented as well as the informal conversation that happened afterwards. People lingered at many of our meetings to talk for about an hour later. We learned much about communities. We learned much about the needs of the communities, from sewer lines to Wi-Fi to concerns about schools that are in busy intersections. So it was a wide range of wealth of information, and it was very well attended, which you will learn in just a few minutes. So that's my comments and updates, and I want to get to the maps because this is something we all want to take a look at and focus on and see how the maps were drawn. Of course, leading very much with the Voting Rights Act, and that was the main step. Everything else did come secondary, but as we got input from the communities who reached out to us and attended the town halls, we adapted that as well. So that's what these three maps are presenting today. And so with that, I'd like to turn it over to Zach, and then followed by Franklin, who will give you an update on the town halls.
Madam Chair, I think it's going to be myself.
Yeah, Zach just texted me saying he's running a little late.
Okay, I thought I saw him on there.
Yeah, I think he's listening, but either way, it was the plan was for me to present the actual maps.
Well, not the maps. No, we're not talking about the maps. Just seeing if you can just give me a little bit.
Sure.
It was about the town halls.
Got it.
Franklin, why don't you come on up and present?
Sure.
Start with you first. I know Zach mentioned he had a doctor's appointment. He was running late.
I'll do my best to fill in for Zach. So we had 5 town halls, and if I could remind the task force, they were May 25th at the Prisco Center in Aurora, May 26th at the Elburn Lions Club in Elburn, May 27th at the Adult Activity Center in Carpentersville, June 2nd here at the Kane County Government Center in Geneva, and June 9th at Hampshire Township yesterday in Hampshire. Those locations were planned out to be very specific in the county, so people who would wish to attend wouldn't have to drive all over the place. I know a question was, why wasn't it in Elgin? And my response was, having it in Carpentersville, you can reach the Dundees, Carpentersville, and Elgin. And so it made sense to it made sense to those people. The goal was to educate and to listen, and I think we succeeded in both. We heard some relevant and non-relevant testimony. As Madam Chair had said, some of the non-relevant testimony about the schools that are being built or programs need to be addressed in Spanish, etc. But the relevant testimony is the representation. Communities don't want to be separated. They want to be contiguous and compact, and we've succeeded in that. When we come to the poll, as stated before, it wasn't scientific, but we had 24 participants. If you'll see at the next slide, the town hall attendance, so 232, which includes in-person, those on Zoom here in Geneva, and those that have watched on YouTube. So we find it to be very successful in terms of listening and educating. Personally, myself, with Zach, the VRA, understood a lot. And quite honestly, the conversations that Madam Chair had addressed before, a lot of the individuals that came in attendance had the same understanding. They didn't know that much about the Voting Rights Act, and they walked away understanding the process of why we sit there and not only redraw the maps every 10 years, but why we have to focus on certain districts. I'm happy to answer any questions specifically as best I can, or we can sit there and go back to the takeaways. As you can tell, some of them are very specific in terms of, for instance, the bottom, why not wait till the census data? I believe the answer was fair in every single town hall. We need to continue the process until the governor signs the bill that allows us to continue past July. So that was understood and accepted. And then the one where it says keep municipalities and areas together, avoid splitting. That is something that we may have assumed prior to going into this, but it was definitely highlighted for us to hear at every single one of these town hall meetings. MALDEF was brought up a few times. Why are we even looking at the MALDEF maps? And so Madam Chair, I believe, did an amazing job talking about the context, where we were 10 years ago, and as a preface to where we will be today when we see the new maps on the growth of minority districts throughout Kane County. With that being said, is there any questions that I can answer more specifically, Mr. Shepro?
The heading of this takeaways from the town hall meetings. Some of these appear to be conclusions, not necessarily statements that I heard at these meetings. I guess, for example, why is the MALDEF map being presented? As you noted, Madam Chairman explained why she was presenting it. I don't recall any comments from the public other than to say, why are we looking at this map? And then others did reflect some comments like keeping municipality and areas together. But for example, Hispanic population in the Northeast and Southeast must be addressed. I don't recall any citizens really saying that. I think that was part of the presentations that was made by the county staff and Madam Chair. I'm not saying that that wasn't discussed, but it's difficult to look at this list and say, what did the public contribute to this? I got my own table, which I perhaps will circulate. As I recall, having been at 3 and watched the other 2, I don't think we had more than like 3 people giving actual testimony. at any one of the hearings. And certainly it was very small. And much of what's been discussed are presentations that were made to the public, taking a particular point of view as to what should be done and how. But I really found to be very few useful takeaways. As was pointed out, a lot of people wanted to talk about things like, we want better schools, or the rural areas don't have their own representation and they should. And of course, I think it was pointed out that in many cases, can't do it. There's not enough people in those areas. But the people I talked to and watching the hearings was that I still think most people did not really understand what a lot of the jargon was. And again, one example only is the poll or the testimony outline that was given that as suggestions was describe your community of interest. And I didn't really get the sense that, I think there was one question in all of them about, well, what is a community of interest? And then she rattled off a bunch of interesting things, which arguably were communities of interest, but
I'm
not.
sorry, who is she?
I did not get her name. All I know is that she walked in about the same time that Board Member Strathman did, but sat in the back of the room.
Oh, one of the speakers.
Yeah, was
Oh,
one
I'm
of the, yeah, she said, well, what is a community of interest? And I'm not sure she left with, because the things that she outlined, for example, were, I think, accurately described as not being a protected group.
Mhm.
Like, I think an example was educational background, things like that, which are arguably a community of interest, but not a relevant one for redistricting. So I guess my overwhelming feeling is that it was premature to do this because most people didn't know what they were commenting on, and there were no current maps to react to. And as I say, in a lot of cases, the wish lists were things which were either not relevant to redistricting or legally could not be done. So I continue to feel that we didn't really get any actionable information out of any of these hearings,
Well,
my point of view.
I know that has been your point of view right along, and your point of view is noted and taken, but I'm not going to say that being able to bring Kane County's government to our municipalities is inappropriate, wrong, or inappropriate use or misuse of taxpayers' money. It has been brought to my attention as an example that in Hampshire, it has been a minimum of 8 to 9 years since the chairman of Kane County went to Hampshire for a meeting. I've been there 3 times in less than a year. So being able to bring our government to these areas, to be able to introduce what we do, to hear our citizens' concerns, their elected leaders' concern in both an informal and formal manner is critically important. And at yesterday, I did hear about the needs of their communities of interest. And that was done after the meeting was over. And
I
I
think
went
that's when-
back.
That's when
and
the
I-
Hampshire Village Board violated the Open Meetings Act.
I was talking to one individual at a time.
Okay.
But with
But-
all due respect, I do believe when I said there's relevant and non-relevant information, the relevant information that you're mentioning, I completely agree. You know, there may be a minority of takeaways that would help us draw a map for this instance, but I also agree with Madam Chairwoman that the exercise of going out there to the public to educate them on the process and how they can be a part of it, not just for one day, but for the next 10 years, is extremely important to the citizens of King County as well. And that goes to the non-relevant information.
A point of order. I don't think Mr. Ramirez's job is to be an advocate for a particular point of view. He's supposed to be here to assist the committee, but not to pass compliments around or elevate one argument over another. And I
Understood.
think that's what he's doing, and I think that's not appropriate.
If, so your considerations and your thoughts are heard. And I've given my opinion on what I believe to be the value. We had board members attend some of these meetings, which was welcomed, and a wonderful opportunity as well to meet their constituents in these areas. That was very important and powerful from their point of view. Some came to many meetings, as yourself. Some only came to one. I was happy that they were there, but not to belabor this, but I believe that we can analyze the takeaways if you'd like to be able to spend the next 10 minutes talking about this, or if everyone would prefer, we can continue to move on to this agenda and let the next hour to actually start focusing on the purpose of this meeting is really to take a look and analyze these next 3 maps.
Move on.
I believe, would everybody like to move on or to continue this conversation?
I think we should move on.
Thank you very much. Excellent. Thank you, Franklin. All right. I think, who's next? Is that just, I'm sorry, Justina? And Phil is here as well to be able to assist.
I believe Phil was gonna do a brief intro before I start on the maps.
Oh, perfect, thank you.
Gotta push the button.
Oh, sorry. I don't know how to do it on or off. You have before you 3 maps, as well as maybe one of the more interesting things to start is what Josina did at the beginning, or what you have in front of you is what we call the demographic chart. I'll explain it real quickly. There's 4 maps analyzed here. One is your current map. That's the far left one. Then versions 1, 2, and 3. Then you will see the deviations between the districts, percentage-wise. These are, as we've talked about many times, estimates based on ACS. Hence, at some point, these districts will have to change. But the interesting part, and what is the same in all of the maps, is Josina started, as we talked about before, with what we call the Section 2 areas. She started with the Latino districts. Your prior map had, and we kind of, there's a rule of thumb that when you're drawing with total population, that you draw with, especially when you're dealing with this and you don't have actual numbers. The rule of thumb is that for a Latino district to be effective, the courts have said 65% need to be Latino in the district. Why is that? Well, you have a couple issues. One is both Latinos and Black families historically have larger families than white families, so your voting age population goes down 5% historically approximately versus your total population. So a 65% district will probably only have a 60% voting age population compared to the white, which is, historically, especially in the suburbs, whites have smaller families. The other problem you have with Latinos trying to make sure the districts succeed is the lack of citizenship. As we know, many Latinos are not citizens, so you take that into account to try and determine if the district can be effective for them to win a seat. Your prior map, at least not when drawn, but today, and I'm not going back to how it was drawn, is you only have 3 districts that are currently more than 65% Latino as it sits today. You have 2 between 60 and 65, which are kind of on the edge, and then you have 2 between 50 and 60 and 1 at 49. What Josina has drawn for you and what you have in front of you today is 6 districts at 65% or more, or 60, I'm sorry, 5 at 65%, 1 at 64, 1 at, and 2 at 63. So in essence, in the 2 at 63, she has, I think, tried to put as many Latinos as possible in those districts, but from a population standpoint, that's about the extent she can do. So those are some of the northern districts. Most of your population of Latinos is in the northeast, is in the southeast area, the Aurora area. So all 3 of these maps, the Section 2 districts, or the Latino districts in particular, are the same. So we started with that. Then we asked Josina to draw 2 to 3 different maps, keeping those Latino districts in place. And pretty much you could honestly draw, and as Josina will tell you, pretty much an infinite number of maps. Depending where you start, depending on every decision you make, it changes every other decision. So we asked Josina to start in 3 different places and just draw as compact as she could, trying to get the equal population, as well as honestly trying to make sure that incumbents were not paired against each other. So what you have in front of you is 3 different maps. If you go to the second page, that's the overall version 1, 2, and 3. You can kind of get your best handle on the overall vision of the map. And then the pages after that, you have version 1 broken down into a south and a north, version 2, version 3, all done the same way. And then the last page is your voting rights districts in Aurora, the southeast corner. And as you will see, you know, honestly, the voting rights districts are not going to look as compact as the rest of the districts. It's just the reality of what happens to try and comply with the Voting Rights Act. This, compared to the state map over the past 20, 30 years, looks really compact. The city of Chicago takes districts out from Chicago out to Tinley Park. From Chicago, there's a Senate district that goes from the south side of Chicago all the way to Kankakee County, Bourbonnais area. So when you think about it, these are not as long and narrow as what you'll see when you see the state map. So I think she's done a really good job on the Section 2 districts. I think she's done a good job on all of it, but the Section 2 has been her focus. And then to give you some options to look at as far as the rest of the county. I believe Josina, the other thing she tried to do, and it's not completely possible, but is to keep as many of the cities together as possible. So that one of the things, as we've talked about, I think before, I've been doing this for a long time. I'm not really sure what a community of interest is. It can be one of a million things. It could be schools, it can be towns, it could be churches, it could be, depending on where you are, roadways, statewide, it can be, you know, TVs, radio areas. But one thing I personally believe is usually a pretty good feeling for communities of interest is a city. We kind of identify ourselves in the suburbs by the town we live in. We don't do it by the parish like they do in Chicago or wherever it may be, or the neighborhood. We do it primarily through our towns. So I know there, you know, you're going to find areas that are not, towns are not completely intact, but I know that is, to the extent possible, was one of Josina's goals. If there are versions that you want to see areas closer, Josina will be able to provide that for you over the next week or so. If there's particular areas you want to see, roads, et cetera, as the chair said, we can get you that information. We're trying to give you a feel for it today, and whatever information you think you need as we go forward, Josina, I know, is happy to provide you. Josina, do you want to kind of talk more about how you got here?
Sure. Thanks, Phil. So I know that the last time I presented to you all focused specifically on the Section 2 voting rights districts. So I think that we can start there. Whoever's controlling the slide, you could put it on the last slide that zooms in particularly to the Aurora area. So these districts are pretty much the same as what were presented a few weeks ago. The feedback that we got specifically about the voting rights districts, which are all effective Latino districts at 63 to 65% Latino, was also about keeping the African-American population within those districts as cohesive as possible. So there were amendments made to District 6. So it is continues to be 14% African American. So we were able to amend within the effective Latino district to keep as much of the African American population within the north west side of Aurora together in District 6. Similar amendments were made in the Elgin districts, District 17 and 20, I believe. In which we were able to keep more of the African-American population within District 20, along with some of the key African-American institutions that were brought to our attention to keep together with the African-American population. So within the voting rights districts that were presented before, those are the amendments in this updated version.
May I ask a question, please?
Sure.
What
Yes,
are the
Ms.
red
Bates.
lines?
Excuse me, Ms. Bates, make sure you identify your name.
Mavis Bates, please.
Yes.
The red lines are the old district lines. So I know that it's hard to read, but I did want to keep them on there for reference for you all.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
No problem. The second thing that I did after the voting rights districts was the eastern side of King County, trying to draw districts that kept municipalities together, as Phil said. So all of these try to keep as much as possible, both in consideration of population size to draw equal population districts, but also in consideration of incumbent addresses to ensure that people are not drawn into the same district. We were able to keep municipalities like Batavia and Geneva together, municipalities like St. Charles, because you have multiple board members who live in the same municipality, was split along the river, which seemed like a logical place to split. So you can see that the eastern portion is largely drawn for those two particular reasons. Again, keeping municipalities together and keeping incumbents singly in a single district. And then based on the feedback that I think was mentioned earlier, I know that there was feedback specifically about the western side of Kane and wanting to ensure that there was more rural representation within some of those districts. The incumbents who represent the western districts do largely live in municipalities within the western district. So you see that there are three different versions in the second slide of the western end of King County. And that, again, is really for you all as people who live and know the western side of King County and the different kind of local dynamics, which you think are most representative versions of the western end of King County. So I'll stop there and open for questions.
And I do have a comment. At last night's meeting, communities of interest, let's go back to that with Hampshire. I was asked, and this is something that I don't know where these locations are, but because they have been working previously in an isolated manner, both the town as well as the park district and the water reclamation district, they would like to be able to work together. If we could keep those areas, those community of interest in one and not split them up, that was requested. Some, perhaps Mr. Copey could,
Where's that at exactly? Which number? Oh, 9? Number 9.
so you can see on the 3 maps, the 3 versions. We know that the middle one, version 2, would comply with that. I'm not quite sure about version 1 or version 3. But Mr. Copey could probably advise us at least.
What's the question, ma'am?
Related to the
Park
drainage
districts, Hampshire Park District, the Hampshire Park District, as well as the town, and the town is kind of growing piecemeal.
Don't know exactly where.
Microphone.
I don't know exactly where jurisdictional boundaries of the Village of Hampshire goes to the south, but version 2 seems like it would be sufficient to meet that, the ends to that argument.
I would agree with you on that, but here's the next question, and we can start with going west and going back. Version 1, 2, and 3 for District 15 are all completely different. It's, and are there any comments on District 15?
Limited to District 15?
That's Barb Winicki, who's currently the incumbent on that.
We're just seeing this. I think we'd probably all want to think about this.
Correct. I agree with you on that, but you see how the impact is going to be. Yes.
To the point about the Park District, I guess I would want to see some, and I know it'll be a mess because there's so many, some overlays of things like fire protection districts. I think that might be more important than whether the Park District fits, things like that. But all of those are, I think, of some importance in looking at this. I know we have something like that. I know it's hard to read when you put all of the districts on one map. But particularly in the non-urban areas, the fire district boundaries, and in many cases, even things like drainage districts and so forth may have an impact. But I also had a question about for Phil, about so I think you said, and it looks like it's true, that each of the 3 maps, the Section 2 districts are identical. Is that
Correct, Mr. Shepro.
and so this is really just a question. Do they all have to be identical? I mean, isn't there theoretically more than one way to draw compliant districts?
Theoretically, yes. I will tell you that I think Josina worked hard to get to that 65% number in as many of those districts as possible. But yeah, if there's certain districts you would like to see looked at differently, we can obviously do that.
And from a demography standpoint, I presume, I mean, you can identify clusters of the population, but what data do you look at to determine? Because presumably there's some areas that have a higher percentage of non-citizens than others. And that there must be some way to identify those areas, because presumably from what you've said, if there's a high percentage of non-citizens, then the total population minority would have to be higher to reflect voting age population.
Yeah. Josina, normally the CVAP comes out in about September, I believe, normally the census kind of rolls out different data at different times.
Can you say?
I'm sorry, citizens voting age population. We call it CVAP. That's the citizen rate of any particular block or block group. The The citizens voting age population at best, we kind of talked about this before. You have the block, which is your lowest. You have a block group, which is the next lowest geography. Then you have a tract. Voting age population in the ACS is only available at the tract level. Okay? Citizenship, CVAP, I think Josina is also at that level in the ACS.
Yes.
So, you know, we talked a number of times about disaggregation and reaggregation, none of which, only part of which makes sense to even me. But now we were worried about disaggregating and reaggregating at the block group level. To do it at the track level is one more level, and the numbers become even more buried and have less accuracy. The state or the Census Bureau will come out with CVAP at some point based on the census. Whether we receive that in time for you to finish this map is somewhat questionable. Everything's beyond what it once was. I would tell you in past years, by December, I clearly had that in September, October. Whether we get that for you this year is really up in the air, and considering how delayed everything else is. So the PL data usually does not have CVAP, or citizens voting age population. It usually comes out about 5, 6 months, 8 months later. So that's the concern I have about, it can be disaggregated and reaggregated based on ACS data. Now we're back kind of drawing with ACS, which is scary to me. And then when you're disaggregating at such a level, I get nervous too. So that, I guess that's the long way of saying, I don't know what I'm going to be able to give you and when as a board.
The other question related to that, is it a relevant factor under the Voting Rights Act that the source of the Hispanic population, I mean, I'm told that studies indicate that there are different communities of interest between people of Puerto Rican versus Central American versus Mexican and so forth. Is that ever a relevant consideration?
It is, in the fact that from a citizenship standpoint, Puerto Ricans obviously are all citizens, right? So there are pockets of Puerto Ricans in the city, and I don't know what it's like in King County. So, you know, there are pockets of Puerto Ricans that are obviously citizens. So you don't have as much of a citizenship problem in those areas. On the state map, we draw those areas at somewhere like 55 to 60 because you don't have to worry about the -10 for citizenship. I don't know if there's any pockets of Puerto Rican population or South Americans that may have a greater citizenship rate in King County. I just don't know, and I don't know that the data is out there. And Josina, do you have any clue about that? I don't know that data is available.
No, I think my primary response to that is I think that that's right with the American Community Survey data that, you know, even just using the total population numbers is, you know, not as comfortable as what we're used to with the census numbers. And so to disaggregate at these larger geographies with even more flawed data sets is not ideal. And that's also part of why in drawing the voting rights districts that we optimize the Latino population to 65% as much as possible. That's part of what the 65% total population number takes into account is citizenship and age differences in Latino populations. And so that's why we erred on the side of optimizing them at, you know, to 65% and 63% as the minimum.
Exactly. I get it.
Yeah, there are public services, private services that have tried this disaggregation even at the total pop level, and I've looked at least 5 or 6 different ones. And the total population in, let's say, a legislative district might be 5 to 6, 10, 8% different, one disaggregation method versus the other. And, you know, there's a lot of bright people doing it, and they all come up with different numbers in different ways.
That reminds me, I've heard stories in Chicago back several decades ago, where families of Polish descent or Polish heritage were considered a discrete community. And then wards were redrawn and they were disseminated into different areas. And the Polish community got very upset because they were no longer able to have somebody who spoke their language, went to their church, had their values and beliefs, elected to represent their wards as aldermen. So it's very similar to what you're saying.
Thank you. That, at least for me, was very helpful.
I think I probably confused more than I helped, but I apologize.
One last follow-up for this segment is when we've talked about packing, how do I want to put this? If it turns out that there is a very high non-citizen population, would that suggest that you would then perhaps overweight above the 63% to make sure that you captured enough actual voting age citizen population? Or is that not doable? Or
If you found out, I mean, there's extremes, obviously, and when we talk about packing, and we usually look at the extremes, and like one of your prior districts, I don't think when it was drawn, but is today 83%. That's such a huge number. I would tell you, you can't do that, right? And I think you have another one at 78.
78.
Yeah, 83 and 78. So you have to kind of weigh it. If you told me it went from 65 to 67, I wouldn't call that packing, right? If you get to that 72 to 75% range, I'd tell you we really need to look at that. If we could tell, if we have enough data to tell where citizenship is, we would look at that again pretty heavily. I mean, and honestly, if you looked at CVAP, even if you got to 70% of a CVAP, I would tell you we really need to think about how we're doing this.
and that I would presume is a objective test and not an intent-based test.
It is, for the most part, yes. However, I think courts realize that the data you have when you draw is the data you have when you draw. Especially given the fact that CVAP seems to come out. Well, CVAP, I will say that historically, when most people draw, CVAP's not out there, but we use it at trial to give us more information when we do these cases. And you can only work with what you have at the time. And God forbid we're wrong and someone comes in, we're going to have a conversation when we see CVAP. But I don't think you're looking at those kinds of numbers here, just because I don't think you will see CVAP. I don't think you're going to have any pockets when you're talking about 21,000 or 22,000 people where so many of a Puerto Rican nature lives in one town. I think they're going to be spread out enough. I'm not really overly concerned about us ending up finding we packed.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Franz.
Roz speaking. I'm just curious, is there population data for each of the versions? Or
Yeah, you see the deviation. So we didn't give you population numbers, but the deviation is based on that. That's what deviation column is. So 1% would be approximately, 210 or 215 people, one way or another. Is that correct, Josina, off the top of my head?
Right, the ideal population of a district is 22,141.
So every 1% would be 220 people approximately, right?
Yeah. Yep.
and then you mentioned getting us the possibility of getting us more detailed maps.
Yeah, we can do that. I
think
guess.
the idea was that we were trying to get some conceptual feedback on these first, and then after that can provide detailed districts to each board member.
Yeah, it's not, there's a lot of work in providing that. It's something you can read, at certain offices, and I've seen, we use plotters. I mean, it's that kind of, it's not the kind of thing you can put on 18 by 12 or whatever size map this is, and you really see it.
Madam Chairman?
Mr. Martins first. Hold on, please.
I'm going to guess that most of the board members that look at this have focused on their district. And so I don't know, what, in a broad sense, what are the differences in the three versions? I mean, the southeast quadrant stays the same. But I mean, we're not going to be in some trick bag, are we? Where 2/3 of us like version 2 and 1/3 of us like version 3, and you know what I mean?
I think the highlight 15 seemed to be.
15 is significant.
15,
Yeah, I
5,
mean,
and
that's what I
18
looked
have
at.
the
It looked
most
like they were pretty
significant.
much all the same.
I'm sorry, Josina, please.
15, 5, and 18 have the most significant change across the three versions, and then you can see 9 is the same in 1 and 3 and different in 2.
I mean, primarily the whole eastern 1/3 is very, very similar. It's really how you really want to look at this western. We had heard that there was some thought process, Mr. Martin, of, hey, can you give us more agricultural districts, for lack of a better word, or rural areas? And so we really focused on trying to give you some ideas in that regard. If you're trying to keep cities and towns together to the extent you can, that kind of drove a lot of the east side.
Yeah, the east side, I understand. And I have a German heritage. I like rectangles more than.
You and me both. Last name is Lutkehans. But you're correct. I mean, if I look at this map from a strictly, and we can give you compactness numbers if you want them to see what they are. But I look at this map and I say, well, you know, each one has some different areas that are more compact than others, right? I mean, obviously version 2 in the north is kind of prettier. Version 1 and version 3 in the south are nicer from a straight look standpoint, but we don't know your areas like you do. Josina was trying to do this as much blind as she could and wanted to hear your thoughts as we go forward. Because it
And
is your
Phil, I
map, but it isn't ours, right?
Right. And Phil, I would add, when you see these jagged lines, that's largely because that's how your municipalities or your precincts are shaped. So when you see the nice clean lines, while they're pretty, they largely split precincts or split municipalities. So the reason that you see jagged lines, for instance, in number 9, that's the shape of the municipalities. So just as a note of particularly the odd shaped lines, that is following the lines of municipalities or precincts.
Yeah, and 15, obviously we talked about 15 a lot. It kind of drives a lot out other things. Because 15, 18, or the west part of the county has very little population comparatively, to grab the numbers you need to make it equal makes you grab kind of larger areas than it may look like on the east. And that makes it kind of scary. It makes it look a little off, let's call it.
We have 3 people who'd like to speak. I believe Ms. Bates and Ms. Myers.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm not sure I need more detail, and I want to agree with, I think it was maybe Mr. Kenyon who said we are all concentrating probably mostly on our own districts. And in Aurora, we can't read the street names to know what street is in our district and what isn't. Is there a way to get a higher resolution on what you have? And
Are you saying the last slide that zooms in on Aurora, you can't read the names?
right. the
Okay,
street
sure.
names.
I could read them on the digital version, so I thought they were readable. I can make the font larger.
Well, I'm on my screen. I'm not on a piece of paper, but I cannot read the names. When I blow it up, I lose resolution.
Okay, sure.
Oh, that would be
Well,
wonderful.
Could you
Thank
take
you.
Aurora Township and make it a lot bigger, because that's where really all those districts are. You can read some of the street names, but
That is what
Right.
you have on the last page, but I can make the
Yeah.
font larger and a higher resolution, so it's
Mhm.
readable.
Did we receive
sure.
these papers in email? Those of us, on Zoom? Do we,
We have those available for you, yes.
okay. Can you send those in email, please?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Mr. Meyer?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate it. Similar to the comment about the Aurora Township precincts, if it's possible to get something a little higher resolution in Elgin Township, I think that might be helpful as well. On the far west side, I can kind of tell Coombs Road is one of the delineations. Route 20 is a delineation. I think Nestler in one place. That's a little easier to see even at this Zoom, but it's more difficult to see to the east in 19, 22, 17, and 20. I think that might be helpful, in particular to Ms. Strathman, Ms. Allen, so they can see where some of the changes in their precincts are. I think that could be helpful.
Noted,
Sure.
absolutely.
Josine, is it possible to put this over a Google map, or is that not capable with Maptitude?
Let me look into that.
Yeah, that's what they did with the
be a
state
great
maps, and
idea.
it's good.
Mr. Gately?
Yes.
I'm sorry, Mr. Meyer still has the floor.
Yeah, that was just a precatory question. I have a couple of follow-up questions, and these are on the Section 2 districts in Elgin. And this was something I asked about 10 years ago when we did a map. Elgin is a town that has, for a long time, at least I've lived there my entire life, thought of itself in terms of communities of interest. One of the principal communities of interest, at least growing up, was an East Side and West Side town. And I don't know what this does in terms of statistical data, though I think probably there'd be less of a disparity now than 10 years ago. Both sides of what I'll call old Elgin, so east of McLean Boulevard, are now Hispanic majority communities. And so I always was wondering why it was that we never looked at maps that recognized that east-west boundary. I mean, everything from high school boundaries, Larkin and Elgin High School,
Communities of interest.
Little League boundaries, Elgin Classic versus Elgin National Little League. I mean, I always wondered why we didn't look at it that way. And I don't think that would do anything to affect Ms. Strathman or Ms. Allen. As it is now, Ms. Allen's on the south side, Ms. Strathman's on the north side. And so, but even looking at it east-west, that wouldn't change. You would have no incumbents, competing against each other. But I would be interested in knowing what that did statistically, if that would still allow us to respect the Section 2 requirements to make these Latino majority districts, but yet still recognize an additional community of interest. I would be interested in seeing that as an alternative, at least for consideration.
If you're able to provide us some demarcation, and Josina is able to put that demarcation in there and I think show you what that is.
Okay.
But, Josina and I sure as heck don't know what it is, right?
Yeah, I mean, literally, it's the river.
Would it help if because we have the data, the estimate data by precinct.
Oh, yeah, if
So
you have
could
it,
take one of these districts, blow it up with the precincts and have, that will show the gradations.
sure.
within.
When I looked at this 10 years ago, there wasn't quite enough population on the west side alone, just kind of flipping 17 and 22 from a north-south to east-west in order you'd had to add in, I think, precincts 1, 2, or 3 from the northeast side of town in order to get the west side to have sufficient enough population to be substantially equal. If we have that data on a precinct basis, I think that might be something we could put together and take a look at. I'd just be interested in seeing that so we could, capture also some additional communities of interest. And I noticed that the suggested changes here, which are the same on versions 1, 2, and 3 for these districts, have done more to add some greater concentration of the African-American population into district, I think it's 17 is the one on the south.
Correct.
And I would suspect if you go east-west that you might actually even increase that number or that statistical, maybe by another point or two. There's always been a larger concentration of the African-American population in Elgin on the near southeast side of town than there has been on the west side of town. So it might enhance the voting strength of that community of interest. And then my final question relates to districts 2, 6, and 7 in Aurora. I wanted to know if there's any concern about the fact, and I know we're trying to get to that 65% number for the Section 2 districts for Latino residents, but is there any concern with the fact that we go and District 2 from a 49% Latino population down to a 26% population, increasing the white population in that district by 20 points in doing so. And at the same time, I think if you look at the map, it looks like a lot of the Latino residents that are currently in District 2 then are drawn into District 6 and 7. I understand to get that 65% number, but does that have an adverse or a concerning effect on the relative strength of the African-American vote in District 6?
Well,
I don't know
yeah.
if that's a concern or not.
Well, let me tell you, District 6, we worked at this a lot because I know, we heard from Board Member Ford. He wanted to keep as much of, and maybe others, I think I heard it elsewhere.
Community members as well.
And community members, others, I'm sorry. We heard it from another people. Hey, please try and keep the African-American districts together.
Yeah.
When you first saw District 6, I think the African-American population was 10, 11%.
Yes.
And now we've been able to get that to 14, so we didn't, for lack of a better word, dilute that effect. So that's, now, as far as your comment about 2 and 6 or 2 and 7 and 6, I think that was the 3 you mentioned.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if that's a concern that we take so many Hispanics out of one district. I understand it's so that you get to 65% in 2 other ones, but right now they're almost at 50% in 2, and then they would now be at
26.
Yeah,
Do they have a basis to complain if they went from 50 to 25?
No, they would not have a legal basis to complain. The reality of it is you've now created actually a couple, but in that area, you've created a stronger Section 2 district and actually probably number of Section 2 districts that are stronger and have an opportunity to elect a candidate of their choice. It's not like whenever you make a decision, someone is going to have either a better or worse chance to elect someone that looks like them if they want, or someone who they want to.
but there's no basis for a legal concern there
No.
because they weren't already a district where they'd be able to statistically elect the candidate of their choice. And so that's not changing in terms of prospective outcomes, and that's a reason why it's not a legal concern.
Correct. The courts look more at like, what is the overall effect of the change, not what is it on one particular neighborhood.
Thank you. That answers my question.
Can I ask a question of you? Or a favor of you, maybe is the best way to put it.
Yeah.
For Josina's sake, I know we talked about the river. Is that really or are there precincts that, I guess, what's the best way to get you the information you're looking for? Because that's what we're hoping to do for you.
If you can get me the Elgin Township map with zoomed in, it also then shows the populations in the precincts. I think I can take a look at what you have in one versus another now and try to reorient it with an east-west axis as opposed to a north-south axis. I think that would be sufficient.
Let me tell you that it'll be easier for us to do that than for you. Because I will tell you that when we get you to that map with population and precincts, it will be so small, it'll be very hard.
That's fine. All I'm asking, if you're going to do the work, which is great because I have no time anyways. So what I'm suggesting is that we take a look at seeing if there's a way to lawfully draw it and still achieve the Section 2 purposes, but respective community of interest that is delineated principally where possible on the river is an east-west axis as opposed to roughly Chicago Street as a north-south axis.
There's no, Josina, you don't have any problem looking at that. We'll see what it does, but I think based on some of the numbers we saw, it'll be very hard to get.
Yes, it would.
On the
Yeah,
one side.
you just don't have enough Latino density on the west side of Elgin. The density is largely on east of the river. And so you can easily draw, I think to your point earlier, an effective Latino district on the east side of the river, the west side. So I just drew it, and you can't see it, but it's only 50% Latino west of the river. To draw it,
west of the river and east of McLean Boulevard is only 50% Hispanic.
I didn't do the boulevard; I just did the river.
Right. Well, that's what I'm saying. Is this district that the western boundary of these two districts is roughly McLean Boulevard. I don't think there's any part of these two districts that's, well, maybe now there's one precinct west of. I think 42 now under this map is in one of those districts, and 42
the
is
McLean Boulevard that you refer, is that west of the river?
It's west of the river. It's really basically the central median of the city of Elgin now. The river is no longer the central median of the city of Elgin.
Right, so I'm
but-
saying to take any configuration of Latino population that is west of the river, you can't be above 52%, no matter where you go west of the river.
Okay, I lived on Schuler Street, which is east of McLean Boulevard, for the better part of my adult life. I am telling you that east of McLean Boulevard, it doesn't matter where you are in the city of Elgin, it is majority Hispanic community at this point. All I'm asking is if we can take a look at just 17 and 20, not anything west of McLean Boulevard. I'm not asking to change anything west of McLean Boulevard. I'm saying taking a look at 17 and 20 and seeing if in those two districts, if we orient them with an east-west axis, where at the river, as close to the river as possible, if we can achieve still Section 2 requirements, but achieve then also the goal of respecting communities of interest between the east and west side.
Before Mr. Gately, if I may, Ms. Strathman, what do you feel about that? Because we're talking about one of your areas.
Well, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Ms. Strathman here. I'm not sure that I agree with Mr. Meyer that east of McLean Boulevard is majority Latino population. I myself live in east of McLean Boulevard, and I'm not sure that I agree with that. It'd be interesting to look at, but I think I agree with Ms. Josina that it would be hard to make the numbers meet the criteria of the Section 2 if we did that division of the river.
Okay, okay. Okay.
Madam Chair, Gums.
Yes, Ms. Well, hold on a second. And unless it's to this point, I'd like to bring Mr. Gately.
Thank you.
He's been waiting.
So I like all three versions. I think it represents our county. I like the idea that you fix the stacking, the districts. I think the community likes the idea. It looks like you, and so for as far as I can see, just from a, 10,000 foot look down at it, the east side looks pretty much the same in all three versions. On the west side, version 2, I like number 9, how they consolidated number 9. I don't know about 15 and the rest, but that's just what I see.
Okay.
I think she did an outstanding job.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Even with Batavia 21?
Well, I don't know. It doesn't matter where I'm at. I'm probably not going to be running for county board myself, but I'm happy with it. I think it looks good.
Okay, very good.
Move forward with one of the three.
Thank you. Thank you. So you have anecdotal version 2 is you have
I
one
like the way
potential
number
vote for
9 is
version 2.
sectioned up.
It is contiguous. I think Mr. Ford was next and then Ms. Gums.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman Ford. I see what was done to get keep the African Americans together in a couple of areas. My one question is that how much of neighborhood boundaries was looked at with this mapping? Because I see the best of my vision on this not be to see the street names as others have mentioned, that a lot of the neighborhoods are really broken up around 6 and 2. That is going to be real confusing come any time with anybody trying to decide what are the actual true boundaries. Before, the one thing that we did before when we did remapping was we cleared up a lot of the boundaries between 6 and 4 and 5 so that people understood in their neighborhoods exactly which district they were in. With this one, 6 is really distorted as far as neighborhoods.
Can you bring up number 6 again? A larger view of
And
Southern Kane, please.
Before, we were really close to the numbers that we needed with the old map. So I have a hard time understanding why the difference needed to take place as far as, it's the one area that's been dramatically changed as far as the new boundaries.
Are you talking about the old map in terms of the one that was presented a few weeks ago or your existing map?
the existing map.
Yeah, the problem with your existing map is that, for example, District 2 is 49%, District 6 is 47% Latino.
Okay.
So you really have to make some significant changes to get to those Latino numbers that we think are necessary to comply with Section
And this is
2.
where I'm curious about the numbers at. This is where I go back to one of my first statements is that nobody knows our neighborhoods, our territory, our area like we do. So some of the changes that's been done to 6, I like to see how the numbers came out with that. A lot of Hispanics really live, it's hard to even explain on a map because I can't see it. I can't see the street names, but where the finger, you got 3 fingers that stick up 3 different directions. So where the finger points north at, there's a lot of Hispanics to the east and to the west of that, which was in the district before.
Yes, I think that's a fair statement. Most likely Josina can see a hate map at her end, but the problem is that both of those districts needed more Latinos in order to have an opportunity to elect a Latino. Hence, that's why, they're both kind of at what we consider the minimum number of Latinos in a district at this point.
And
as far as neighborhoods, you are 100% correct. We don't know them like you do. If you have suggestions, that's one of the things we're here for.
And I do. And as soon as I can get the map with the names on it, I could clearly make that suggestion. Because right now, as far as having clean boundaries, that to me, that should be taken into consideration when doing these mappings.
The thing you're going to have to remember is that the blocks are not always at the same boundaries that neighborhoods. So just be aware of that when you look at it. It's not always the same concept that you and I might look at as our block or our neighborhood. Census doesn't really look at that stuff for us. So there may be just breaks in the way it's the census.
No, I mean, a neighborhood is a neighborhood. I mean, I don't understand what you mean by that.
Yeah, there are, on the edges, you are going to be breaking up something because the census block, these are the geography we use, and Josina can probably describe it better than I can, is geography that's given us by the census. That geography may or may not comply with an actual neighborhood, especially on the edges. They don't really look at neighborhoods per se when they decide here's a block or here's a block group or here's whatever. So you're kind of stuck with that to a certain extent. Now, that doesn't take care of all the issues. I understand that. Right. But to the extent you can provide us that information, we'll get you the best we can for you to do it, and we can look at it.
The one thing about the area on that northwest side, the neighborhoods are pretty distinct. And like Golden Oaks is Golden Oaks, Heritage is a Heritage, and the neighborhood right behind Northgate Shopping Center, those are pretty distinct, solid neighborhoods. And the breakup of the culture in those neighborhoods are pretty strong.
Riddle Highlands.
Yeah, Rural Highlands. We got Timber Lakes. I mean, they're pretty distinct and strong. And before, we made sure that we cleared up those, not to have those conflicts or concerns with the residents.
So, I think what's best at this point is that, as we mentioned, we'll get you detailed maps.
Okay.
And then you can take a look at that and give recommendation, and then we can review. But I
And
do
Madam
know.
Chair or Commissioner Ford, if you have, or anybody, I guess, if you have a neighborhood map for Aurora or any other area, that's something that we have not received of what the boundaries are of neighborhoods. You know, for City of Chicago, that's available in a geographic file. I haven't received anything like that. If you have anything like that, that would be helpful background.
Did you request it from anybody?
No, nobody's brought up neighborhoods until now.
I guess the point, Mr. Ford, is we're definitely willing to look at that to the extent you can help us. These are areas, we're drawing these somewhat blind based on demography as it relates to ethnicity and race to the best we can. But if you have other thoughts and other things, that's why we're here. It's your map. It's not ours.
All right, thank you.
I think next is, I've got Mr. Gums, Miss Gums, I'm sorry, Miss Gums, sorry.
Mr., that's fine. It sounds like everybody here seems to be having the same obstacles as it pertains to the streets and the boundaries. So I presume, Josina, that with each version 1, 2, and 3, that you can easily dissect those districts enough. I would like to get a copy of every individual district with the streets that I can read for comparison along with its data so that I can digest all of that stuff. Everything looks great from here. I think everybody's talking about the same issues. It's very hard to gauge or to express an opinion without having that information. So I would like to have those. So if we could take versions 1, 2, and 3 and do on an individual page each district, the way it's written in version 1, 2, and 3. That's what I would ask for.
Can I make a suggestion? Ms. Gomes, and I completely understand it. I don't want to overwhelm you with 3 different ones because I think most of the east side is pretty similar. And I think having done this a long time, the more maps you see, the more it may be hard for you to, and I don't, Ms. Gomes, I have no idea which district's yours, so please, I'm not trying to. If we could maybe start with getting Josina to give one, at least on the east side, those districts. Josina, on the east side, pretty much all the same throughout. They look it on the map, but I can't.
Yeah, they're all the same. The only thing that's different across 1, 2, and 3 is the western side.
The west side.
Okay, so maybe what you can do is provide those districts a single map of each one of those districts. Would that be, we can do that, Josina?
You can do whatever people would like.
Well, I mean, without breaking the system, I'm trying to say.
I mean, it's a lot of work to create. I mean, we're talking about 75.
Well, that's why I'm saying let's not do all 3. That's what I'm trying to avoid. So if we can do.
Well, it was mentioned just for each of the 24 proposed districts, after we narrow this down, but on the east side of Aurora, because it is so dense, can we even just provide our board members at this juncture a tentative electronic map that they can take a look at on their computer and blow it up accordingly, to put it up, to zoom it up to 300-400%? Would that be easier to do instead of doing a print version?
So what I'm going to try to figure out, and I just haven't done it before, I'm sure there's a way that we can figure this out, is Phil's previous suggestion of being able to load this shape file into a Google Maps format. Then everybody can zoom in and out and see streets much more clearly and much more interactively.
Okay.
Yeah, we may be able to, Josina, yeah, I know we've downloaded Google Maps and put it in a shapefile, so Bamba can probably hopefully do the other way too. I'll call him as soon as we're done here.
Okay.
But we'll figure out something that makes it easier for you. I know there's maybe also an ability to do some different things with Maptitude that Roger and I just talked about as well.
Okay, so
Thank you
we'll
for
do
that.
our very best to get that to you. It's Mr. Sanchez is next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, my question really revolved around the process, which we're kind of addressing right now. What's the next steps, or what format are we going to have these maps available? Because obviously it's not easy to really zoom in on that short presentation we just had. So if we can work out the Google Maps, that would be great. So going forward then, assuming we have some kind of map or maps to look at, are we going to then give our suggestions, ranked choice voting or something like that? What's the next step after this?
Next meeting to bring it down to 2 or to 1 to discuss what you feel best as a committee. which map you feel most comfortable going with. We can delay the next meeting, so you would have 2 weeks, give staff an opportunity, and Josina absolutely the opportunity to be able to take a look at this data and to be able to put it up into Google Maps. That way you'll have a little bit more time, staff will have a little bit more time to review, and then we can meet in the following week, not next week, but the following week, which will give everybody ample time to take a look at Google Maps and to analyze it and to see where as I have to, I'm thinking, Mr. Ford, as we're talking about neighborhoods, they kind of evolved. So you have a development that evolved in Aurora probably, let's say in the 1950s. You have the old section that was built out all linear, and then you have neighborhoods that evolved as construction was coming through.
But there's areas that are clearly defined as far as, especially around the, I would say Sullivan to Indian Trail. Well, I can even go further than that. So
We're all in agreement, but how Aurora kind of grew and expanded.
It's very distinct. When you know the neighborhood, it's very distinct.
No, there's,
Yeah.
your point is well taken. I believe, yes, Mr. Shepro.
One is I think the IT folks could probably draw any map you wanted them to draw. The question is, I think, Phil, and you alluded to, is you don't want to have so many that you don't know what it says. One thing I think we'd all be interested in is there were presumably a set of assumptions that Josina worked down to generate each of these maps. It sounds like section 2 is number 1 on every list. It may be that number 2 might be the same, but at some point, and I think this is good. This is what when I asked for 3, I think we got 3 different perspectives. But for example, there's some assumption built into each of these maps as to where we start with District 15. As was alluded to, are we following township lines, precinct lines, or municipal boundary lines? I think that would be helpful. And to the point about neighborhood areas, I keep thinking of the map I saw as a kid of the 76 community areas in Chicago, which were all very carefully defined and apparently still are considered that. But I'm thinking out here, maybe that's not quite the case. And I wonder, maybe to Mr. Ford, is there an existing depiction that won't label a community area? But for example, if you had a map of the district with the precincts, I mean, some people know there are precincts better than others, but would that be a starting point where you could start to see how it was put together? That would, I would think, be easier to generate than trying to define a community area, which we don't.
Yeah, that would help.
Do.
I think that would be best answered, and I would like to be able to have Roger and perhaps reflect on that, and then take a look at what is actually capable.
I was talking earlier about this, Madam Chairman and I were talking about bringing in what's called the shape file or the polygon. So what you're looking at is a polygon. It's a shape that sits on a map. Those are kind of universal across mapping tools. So what you're talking about is Josina and I getting together and working on getting those things shared so that we can put it into a map and pull layers from our county GIS into it. And whether we do it in one platform or another, they're universal. And we certainly have, I think almost 300 layers of information in the county. So precincts, districts, municipal boundaries, everything that has a tax associated, we have a boundary line and it's the official boundary lines. So once we work with Josina, we can kind of figure out exactly what the best presentation is of that. I heard some mention of Google Maps. I think we have the most recent aerials and they're actually engineered drawings of the county. Lines are engineered, so they're very specific. Google Maps sometimes has some different discretion with what they put on a map. So I don't know if I would want, Google's okay for referential things, but if you want this details, I think using a GIS mapping system would probably be the right tool.
I found the Google Maps of the state to be hard to read.
Yeah.
I would agree. I think that GIS.
Yeah.
So
If-
the technology, they'll work it through.
Well,
If you'd like, I mean, if you're really a Google, Maps fanatic, we could give you what's called a KMZ file or a KML file. If you know what you're doing with it, you can open it in Google Earth and you can do your own thing. You can look at it all you want, So we can create a couple portable formats that you could take and you could look at it on your own, but we could also provide like a web-based version so you could drill in and use our mapping.
I think a platform that the average user could use, I think would be appropriate. And at this point, oh my goodness.
I just talked to my IT guy who, we can provide it to you through Roger, or we could also probably provide it to you through Google Maps. Josina Bamba can do that. He just told me. So
Okay.
one way or
They
another,
just
we'll
said,
get you
I don't know if
something.
you missed the last 5 minutes, but they just said they don't like Google Maps.
Well,
They
some
prefer
said they did and
GIS.
some said they didn't. So I guess I was kind of hearing both. So
Doesn't matter. I mean,
we'll get it to you the best way we can, and maybe more than one way if it helps you.
I would suggest, to your point, that we not meet next week, and perhaps in that time, everybody who has an idea of what map they like could submit that, and then the team could decide which ones would be what people want or would give us the most information.
Madam Chairman?
Yes, Ms. Bates, hold on. Mr. Martin has been waiting. And then I have a question that I would like to ask Mr. Copey, because I'm mindful again of our time. So if I may, unless some of you are mapping, literal electronic mapping experts who are really familiar with how to mix platforms together, I would how about advice coming from staff to give that recommendation on what they feel would be an accessible, equitable manner of being able to present data in a clear, consumable manner, so that it's not overtly complicated, that we can both look at digitally and for convenience to be able to print out for those of us who like to take X's and O's and draw around with pencil copies. Why don't we leave that to them to decide which one would be appropriate? And if there's more sophisticated needs, then after that is done, then those perhaps can be addressed, if that makes sense. So we have 3 people that are on our team right now who are highly competent with map drawing. I think we can all agree with that at all the highest of levels. So they can make recommendation. I think everyone has heard what the needs are. You want streets, you want to be able to see where your community is, you want more detail on it, you want to see where the rivers are, you want to see potential boundaries for park districts, fire protection districts, and municipalities.
Yeah.
And that's what I've heard. Mr. Martin.
At the risk of stepping on the toes of my colleagues who live in the wide open spaces west of Randall Road, these articulating boundaries in areas that are growing like Topsy is kind of a fiction to me. I can tell you Huntley won't look the same tomorrow as it looks today. And so you could have a strange anomaly where you'd have a new subdivision that got annexed to some town and they're in a total different district than everybody else. So at least, and again, I guess I'm just ranting on the simplicity of rectangles, but when I get west of Randall Road, where everything is still growing, it's hard for me to get excited about municipal boundaries because they're all to a town. They're changing.
I would agree. And that certainly was brought to our attention at yesterday's meeting. Thank you. That's a beautiful segue to me asking Mr. Copey my next question. To your point, in 2004, in Hampshire, 3 mayors ago, land was sold and was passed, they could build 1,200 homes. They were just notified that these homes are starting to be built, and it's all been approved. They're just notification that we're going to start this process now. In addition to an additional 178 homes, I believe, across the street from there are also going to be starting to be built. And this was approved in 2004. So it was very clearly told to me by Mike Reed, who's the new mayor there, that don't tell me where my municipal boundaries are because it's mercurial. It is just growing completely different every year. So every year it's going to be changing for us. So Mr. Copey, since we have version 1, 2, and 3 of these maps, which clearly are in your district and clearly they support you, as we heard yesterday. You're their second favorite board member. I heard that very distinctly. So I think you'll have a good chance of being reelected there. Which one do you like?
Thank you for the question. But I don't want to step on anybody's toes. I'm just here for the process. And it's not about me and whether I should or could get elected. It's about the process as a whole. This is way more complicated than I will ever be. I prefer version 2 personally, for the reason, not on my behalf, but for the reason that Hampshire and Huntley have always been very, very closely related. And it does satisfy some of the southern boundary extension of Hampshire, the argument that you had alluded to. And it's essentially the community base that is familiar with each other. Even though version 1 and version 3 would still satisfy some of that, but it wouldn't satisfy the boundary argument in the least. If I may offer some sacrifice to the mapping, I don't want to confuse anything, but both Gilbert's and Pingree Grove could possibly, just for the sake of mapping, has nothing to do with my druthers. Pingree Grove and Gilbert's could be removed from District 9, added into other districts, and then we could move the District 9 western boundary south into Burlington, where there isn't a lot of population, and we'd still have that reduction in population, and you would be able to use those demographics. Pingree Grove has a fairly respectable amount of Latino vote in Pingree Grove, and that could possibly be utilized in 1921 or even 22. 19 or 21, I should say, or 15. I don't know if that helped at all, but I appreciate the question and I'm flattered. Thank you.
Sure.
Madam Chair, I have a point of information. I apologize. Just for clarification, the zoomed in version of the Northern Kane version 2, that's page 4 of the package we were given, is actually an image of the northern half of Kane for version 1. So version 2 is correct on page 2, but if you flip to the zoomed in on page 4, that's actually an image of the northern half of version 1 and not the northern half of version 2. So that there's no confusion about Mr. Copy's comments.
I noticed that earlier and I failed to mention it, but thank you very much.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
just for a point of clarity, the ones that are on the screen, I had Josina resend them while we were sitting here. So that one is corrected that you've been looking at on the screen. The one that we handed out was just before the meeting. So I had her correct it on screen while we're watching, just so you know we're looking at the right ones on screen.
Okay,
I
thank
only
you.
got this far.
Well, yeah, we will resend a copy of this out after the meeting.
Okay, thank you, thank you. And then, to be fair, I will make sure that we talk to Barb Winicky and ask her opinion as well, because that's going to be very important to make sure that she has input on this as well, because it looks like no matter what version is selected, she's going to be, that person is going to be doing a little bit of driving. Mr. Foz?
Fraz speaking. Is Josina still on?
Yeah, she's still, oh.
She's still on. I'm just curious. I'm the representative for District 18 on all 3 versions. There's on the southeast end there's a couple of peninsulas, just one much larger than the other, jutting into Batavia. Can you tell me the reasoning behind that?
It was to actually, my understanding.
We lost you there.
Josina, I think you muted.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
It was actually geography that I have in my system that was not part of Batavia, and that's why it was taken out.
That was, I'm sorry, could you say that again?
I didn't hear the,
It's not part of Batavia itself.
Okay.
It wasn't part of the municipal boundaries, I think is what
So
she
in
said.
order to keep Batavia together in 10, there was almost too much population. So anything that wasn't in Batavia could not go into 10, and that's what that is.
Well, I just,
yeah, that's 21, precinct 21 and precinct 10.
well, in the
which are,
comments
of
I
course,
submitted,
One's North Aurora and the other's unincorporated Batavia Township.
in the comments I submitted early on in this, as far as how to reduce the population of my district, I actually suggested shrinking that area down, and now it's been expanded. I guess District 18 is kind of the France of Kane County here, where it's right in the middle of where everybody wants to bite. But I'm just amazed that after 13 years of building relationships in Elburn, that I'm nowhere near Elburn anymore, and it's become more of a valley district. So I just find it hard to believe that a District 18, similar in shape, if you're looking at version 1, Southern Kane, I can't believe that a District 18, similar to District 5 on that map, couldn't be formed, knowing that Elburn has a population of 4,500 going up to maybe 9 in the distant future. But it's just really chopped up and
Looks like that
very strange.
18.
I guess when you let me finish, please.
Sorry.
I guess maps have to be built using numbers, and that's how these are built, but they're certainly not put together using the interrelations between these towns and, the traditional areas that I'm used to out in the western areas.
I believe we took in your requests on the eastern end of the district. And yeah, the western end changed. And so if you have any requests or feedback, we're happy to
You took my request and doubled down on it. Anyways.
Well, maybe we didn't understand it, I will admit.
It looks like that peninsula to me goes east of the river. It's amazing to me.
I guess what we would ask, and I think maybe we messed it up, but I think we were trying, that was a change that was made to kind of try and comply with some requests there. But what would be, if we could have a central place, whether that's Josina's email, whether that's mine, whether that's the chair's office, where people, when we see the next map or when we have neighborhoods, because we do want this is your map. I mean, let's be very clear about this. This is your map. If you can do those in writing to the detail you can, we can tell you the effect of those, and we really want to do that for you. That's our goal, okay? That's number one. Number two is, one of the things I know we're trying to do, and I would ask the board, is, I know Mr. Shepro mentioned it, fire protection districts, park districts, things like that. If I give you a map with all those on there, you will never, ever understand it, okay? It's too hard, okay? And I'm not trying to be, it's just next to impossible. There's just too many borders. However, when you see this next map, if you have particular areas that you want to see, hey, can you show me the park districts in this area? Can you show me the fire protection districts? They won't be on the same map because it'll be too hard for you. I mean, not unless you can blow it up and really understand it. If you want that information, we can provide that to you if you tell us, hey, this is what I'm looking for, especially in District 18, 9, 4, whatever it is. I mean, I don't know where they are. And especially as the districts. The other thing we've talked about a couple of times about the growth. There's gonna be growth, okay? I know we'd all like to say, okay, let's try and figure out where it's gonna be, and you know some of it. This map you draw is going to be a snapshot in time as of April 1st, 2020. That's the date we have to draw by. Maps that have tried, April 1st, 2020. Okay, that's the date you're gonna get your population numbers. That's the date you're gonna have to draw by. That's what the census date is. I know we're already a year past that. We're gonna be a year and a half by the time you pass a map, but that's the date. Maps that have tried to grow into the population or let the population grow into it have been found to be illegal, especially by the federal courts.
It's a snowsuit.
Yes. You know how we all, when our kids are little, we say, okay, he's a 4 now, but we're going to buy a 6 because I don't want to buy one every 6 months. That's been called the snowsuit district, snowsuit theory, and that has not been allowed. So for concepts as we go forward, I just want you to be aware of those. I'm sure there are huge areas that are going to be changing. You have a lot of that. Kendall County in 2010 just went nuts. In the early 2000s, there was 140% growth in the county over one area, over 5 years or 10 years. So I think those would be helpful for Josina and I to give you what you want. And the more you can do it in writing, because I'll be honest, some of the suggestions we were trying to understand to the best, and the more detail you can give us so we don't honestly screw it up. We're not trying to draw our own map. We're trying to help you draw yours, because I have no desire to decide where your lines are. And I know Josina doesn't either.
Exactly.
Madam Chair?
Oh, yes, if I can just follow up on that. We have established a email that goes to actually Jane's office. So we'll keep that same email. It'll be consistent. She then shares that with Roger, and then Roger then will be able to disseminate that with the mapping. So it's centrally located, so it doesn't get lost in my email. We have a separate folder set up for that. So we don't misstep. The other thing is that I will request, because I also had the, of course, I would review all of your comments and make sure that they're reflected on the maps. Try to make it as succinct as possible and factual as possible. If you'd like the map to be drawn, for instance, up to Randall Road and wherever, 20, tell us, Randall Road and 20, the Northwest Corridor. So that we know exactly what you're looking at, rather than saying specifically, well, we want this neighborhood. Because that neighborhood, you're thinking across the street and we ended on the other side of the street. So try to be as specific as you possibly can as you're doing this with bullet points, as if you're giving somebody old school directions.
And Josina, you have precincts, VTDs, right, Josina?
Yep.
Yeah, so if you give us precincts that you want, hey, we think, look at moving these precincts, we can do that. Those are lined up into the system. So if that's helpful to you.
Very good.
I think, I'm sorry. Ford. I think getting the precinct would be a big help. One of my concerns is that when I look at, when you look at a state map and you see the fingers in it, it's more of a larger area. When you see fingers in a smaller map that relates to, in this case, county districts, you're talking more of a smaller division of streets and blocks. And I can't imagine seeing the printout that would show the voters within that district right now. It would be so complicated for whoever's, this is not about me, it's about the next person, and down the line, because this map that we're doing is for the next 10 years. And before we had that complication, I could see it even more with some of the lines drawn with the one we have. So having the precinct would be a big help. But are some of the precincts going to get changed with the remapping?
They will, but what we're trying to do now is you tell us what areas you think should change or what areas you think. And those precincts are already layered into her system. Does that make sense? Does that clear it up?
No, I understand that. Mapping to me is very simple. I've been mapping most of my career. So before when we did this, we did it in a matter of just a few meetings, and but it's easier as we have said before, we're having more distinct, knowing the boundary of the streets and stuff. So having the precincts would help a great deal.
So, and Commissioner Ford, I would just add for areas in the cities, Aurora, Elgin, precincts are very large geographies in terms of population. So I would actually request in the cities, if you can say precincts, but if there are particular parts of those precincts with street boundaries, those will be easier to move than entire precincts that have sometimes thousands of people in them.
I understand. I just got to have something to work with for me to come up with an answer. That's where it comes down to.
And that's what we're going to be providing you. That's what we're going to be providing you. So everyone, we just typed in the email address to make sure that you have it. Kane County Board at co.kane.il.us. So if you can please send all of your comments there, that would be appreciated. The community members who are on a task force, you are welcome to do this as well, to give comment. And we look forward to getting those comments. And of course, our county board elected officials will, I'm hoping we'll have 24 comments from you for each one of your districts.
Okay.
Now,
Madam Chair, can we provide a deadline for feedback so that I have a point where I know that I have all of it at one time?
Yes, I would like to have a deadline set. So how much, we should backtrack this. How much time will you all need, our demographers, to be able to put this information together in a readable form for the committee? Today's Thursday, Friday.
I can get to you by Monday.
I think we can work that out in the next few days or early next week. So if you said sometime before Wednesday, yeah, next week.
So if we get that to you by next, well, we're not going to be meeting next Wednesday, so everyone could review the maps. And then we want the data brought back to us so that 2 weeks from today, we'll have the opportunity to review the maps and have this conversation again.
Yeah.
So we should get everyone's comments. If you can get the maps to them by Tuesday, is that comfortable for you?
I would try Wednesday of next week, might be easier, just so we have a couple business days.
Okay.
Getting the maps to us and then we.
Yes.
By Wednesday. Okay.
Yes,
So that.
Wednesday next week, I think would be fair. It gives us a couple business days to.
All right. So then when will you need, because we want to have our board members give them ample time to review as well. So I have.
Is the following Monday soon enough, or does that give everybody enough time?
Yeah, for me.
Will that give you all enough time to review?
These will just be these maps bigger. Is that what you're talking?
Bigger, correct.
So any changes or suggestions won't be reflected on those.
That's correct.
Yeah, what we would try and do is if you can, we can give you these by Wednesday next week. If you can get us comments by the following Monday, then Josina can try and incorporate as many as she can in by the Thursday. That gives, Josina works a lot at night, so.
Be sleeping.
Is that doable, Josina? I'm not trying to push you, but I think.
So I would get all of the feedback by end of day Monday and deliver a new map by Thursday.
Does that work for you?
And
I can have the map done by Thursday, but then are people going to want that updated product of every zoomed in district done by that Thursday?
So just, I'm trying to write dates now because
Well,
so that would be Thursday, June 17th.
No, that would be the 24th.
Next week.
For next week, is that they're going to be getting that would be the 16th, Wednesday, the 16th, to receive maps.
Yeah, sorry.
And then all feedback from this task force is delivered to you by Monday. And what is the date, please?
21st.
Then we reconvene on the 24th.
Yeah, Josina, what we'll do, Josina, I think is if we can do it electronically in a way that we can send them something and not a single district, but an overall map that they can zoom in on. That's what I think Roger's talking, and that's what I'm thinking Bamba can help you do as well.
Okay, very good, very good.
Okay, so I can have a map to an updated map by, if I get this stuff by the end of the day Monday, I can have an updated map by end of the day Wednesday, and 24 hours is enough for you guys to turn around the technology.
Which version are we talking about? Because Wednesday we need
That's
to
what's unclear
provide.
to me. That's why I'm trying to make sure,
Yeah.
Roger, that you have enough time, because you're asking
Yeah.
for 4 days now, and now we're talking about 1 day turnaround.
Well, that was the initial street level maps of the districts that if we get those done by next Wednesday, and then there's submittal of comments and feedback that's going to come from the board by the 21st, send it to Kane County Board at co.kane.il.us. And then on that Monday, you would have all of the recommendations that would need to be turned around in a couple of days. So say by Wednesday or Thursday.
No, what she's asking you, Roger, is can you, if she sends them to you by like 5 o'clock on the 23rd, can you get them in a place that for the board by the 3:30 meeting the next day? That's what I think you're concerned about, right, Josina?
Because right now we have the map, and you've asked for until next Wednesday to turn around the product. So I'm saying I can get you the map by Wednesday, but then we're talking about a 24-hour turnaround of the
Yeah.
product to the board members.
If you give me the shape files or anything that's the digital record export from your system, we can pull it in. It takes like a minute, as long as it's in a standard format. If you can give us a shape file.
Okay, we're dealing with the technical aspect, and I'll let that conversation happen to you.
Yeah.
Because the purpose of us, it's interesting to hear, but here's the question.
Sure.
Can we comfortably meet to have this task force decide on the next level of map they want, version 1, 2, make any adjustments? Because we have got to make a decision on which one of these 3 maps you'd like to start moving forward. Who makes the cut? We have to have a cut.
I mean, the deadline's been extended to the end of the year.
I-
I'm not sure what the urgency is.
Well, we're still under and we can have Michelle Neerman speak to this as well as Phil. The governor has not yet signed that. So until that bill has been signed, it is my understanding that even though we anticipate him to sign it, we're still under our July 13th deadline to do the provisional.
I'm unclear as to where we're going to submit we're going to get some maps next week.
You're going to get a map next week.
Right. And then we're going to make our comments.
Correct.
And then is it the idea that
There'll be a new map drawn based
there'll
on
be a
those
new
comments.
map drawn based on the comments?
Correct.
So we're not going to necessarily discuss the comments before somebody redraws the map.
Well, there'll be 24 different comments and perhaps more different
I
comments.
guess that's my question. I mean, the comments may not all, dovetail.
That's
So
correct.
somebody's going to have to decide, comments on one are not going to be reflected because of somebody else's comments.
Perhaps.
Yeah, I think what we would then do is where they conflict or where we would probably just say, hey, we drew one of these, but here's a conflict and you guys, we would probably ask that the two board members try and work through that area. I think that's how we've done in the past. We won't just ignore one. We may draw one and then say, hey, here's what we're having a problem with. We're not,
I mean, we mentioned District 15 and 18. As I eyeball that, Mr. Fries mentioned areas that he'd represented for years, and now they're in somebody else's district. And when I look at Campton Township, that Barb Winicky is represented since the early 90s, that's now mostly in District 14. And I just have an idea that there will be some specific comments about, and it does look like Hampton Hills is also divided among multiple districts. I just wonder if it's a little presumptuous of us to say the map makers are going to resolve those issues before we've had a chance to talk about it. I would suspect some constituents may want to weigh in on how they feel about some of the.
That the constituents will have that opportunity after the board has that provision, your provisional map, because there is that opportunity. That's the beauty of having a provisional map, is that we will have that opportunity for constituents to comment.
I think the later their input is received, the less likely it is that it's going to be recognized.
I think that we ought to, it would be my recommendation, since each one of you know your districts better than the other, that we allow each board member to take a look at their districts individually, comment on the uniqueness of their districts. I think that would be very appropriate.
You're not allowed to comment on any district other than your own.
I'm not saying my thought would be that you can comment, but we should really focus perhaps on those districts. And if you have comments on other districts, and you can certainly share that with other board members, and you can have that offline conference, and they can put it in their material that they're presenting. Does that make sense? Yes.
I would just say, and I think what Mr. Shepard was getting at, if we get the maps, whatever the date was, and then we're allowed to make comments, there's no way we're going to be able to pick a map in 2 weeks if we meet in 2 weeks.
So it's 2 weeks, and then July 7th is our next meeting.
Yeah. So, we're going to need, I guess what I would prefer is that we get the maps, make our comments, and then see what comes of those comments. And then we pick one of those maps, hopefully.
Okay, sounds good. That sounds appropriate. Ms. Neerman?
Madam Chair, if I could just make one caution to everyone, including board members who are not here, to be mindful of the Open Meetings Act. We want to make sure that when we're discussing this offline, just not to violate the Open Meetings Act. Okay, so just be very mindful of that. The standard rule is that a majority of a quorum constitutes a meeting under the Open Meetings Act, and you have to properly notice any such meeting. Okay, so we just want to make sure we're all operating correctly under the Open Meetings Act. Thank you.
I have a question to ask to that. Given that we have voting and non-voting members of this group, and as I understand it, the non-voting members don't count toward a quorum, what limitation, if any, is there on a board member talking with a non-board member of the group?
Actually, the entire committee would constitute, I can't remember now what I can't remember what Aaron said now. Let me think about that, Ken.
Yeah, I mean, the whole group is a public body.
It's a public body,
But
yes.
if some people don't count toward a quorum, you can't have a majority of a quorum if they're not counting toward the quorum, yeah, I guess is my point.
Why don't you, because of the
Let me
lateness of the
ponder
hour,
that, yes.
then you can send an email out
Yes, we will do
to
that.
define that.
We will do that.
So the takeaways for our wonderful staff working hard on this is they're going to figure out how to do the maps. We already see, I think, precincts up there right now.
Yeah.
Get those maps to us, to the members of the board by Wednesday.
Yeah.
You will have until, we didn't define that date, till the Monday, the 21st.
Yep.
To bring the information back to us. So the 16th, the maps you're going to receive in your inbox. The following, and we'll send this to you on the 21st. You're to give them all of your information back to us at the canecountyboard.co, caneillinois.us email. That will all be shared. The maps will then be adapted according to your specifications. Please make them as clear as possible. Street names, if at all, please, addresses maybe, so we know. And then those maps then will be presented back to you on the 24th, which will be our next meeting.
That would work.
We all good?
Yes.
All right, this was a lot. So thank you all so much for your interest in this. Please go at it. And make this map your own. But we do have to be very sensitive to the Voting Rights Act. So that is something we all have to be cognizant of, because that is our legal requirement to do so. Okay, may I please have, if there's nothing else, may I have a motion to adjourn?
Kenyon moves.
Fraz seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Kenyon. Thank you, Mr. Do I have consensus to any nays? None? Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.